Well, let's bring in Alberta Premier Jason Kenney now to discuss this latest campaign effort and his efforts to boost the Alberta economy. Premier Kenney, good to see you. Thanks for taking time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Peter.
Why this stepped-up campaign to press the federal government on the Trans Mountain expansion? They bought the pipeline and support the expansion, and will make a final decision, we expect, in the next few weeks. What are you still worried about?
Well, partly it's an effort of our government to communicate with Canadians from coast to coast about the importance of shared prosperity through the responsible development of our natural resources. There's been some success in the past couple of years. We've seen the majority of British Columbians move from opposition to support for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And we want to continue to see momentum in terms of better public understanding of how high our environmental standards are, the rigor of the regulatory approval for this, and how all Canadians can benefit from getting a higher price from our country's most valuable asset, which is the oil resources that we have.
Are you convinced, and are you confident that the federal government is going to actually approve this project and push ahead with it as soon as possible?
I am confident, Peter. I met with Prime Minister Trudeau and Finance Minister Morneau when I was in Ottawa about 3 weeks ago, and they certainly seem to continue to support the project. Obviously, the federal government is the owner. Having said that, I do respect the fact that the federal cabinet must legally keep an open mind and await the report of the on the consultations with First Nations that was mandated by the Federal Court of Appeal. Mm-hmm. So I do respect that legal process, that it has to be done in the correct fashion, but we obviously are hopeful that it will be approved.
The Senate has before it a couple of bills that I know concern you. Bill C-48 to ban oil tanker traffic in northern BC, and Bill C-69 proposing a new assessment process for major resource projects. Senate committees have proposed that C-48 be scrapped and that C-69 be overhauled with nearly 200 amendments. What do you want from the whole Senate now, because it has to consider these two pieces of legislation? What do you want from the whole Senate when it passes judgment on these bills?
Well, I hope, Peter, that all of the senators will listen to the wisdom and, frankly, expertise of the committee members of the Transport and Energy Committees on these two critical bills. Those senators, in both instances, listened to thousands of hours of witness testimony. They became very real experts on these issues. And in the case of the Transportation Committee, came to the conclusion that there is no defensible rationale at all for a ban on Alberta oil exports off the North Coast. And that's why they effectively deleted the bill. There's no reason for this. If the federal government wants to do that, then it should be imposing a tanker ban on oil imports to off the East Coast or the Gulf of St. Lawrence or the Bay of Fundy. It's not doing that. It's not a ban on foreign oil exports, but on Alberta crude product exports. So I would ask the senators to confirm the report from the Transport Committee on C-48, effectively killing that bill. On C-69, we would plead with the senators to accept all of the amendments adopted by the Energy Committee after extensive consultation. And what I said clearly to the Senate Energy Committee 3 weeks ago, Peter, is this bill will be completely unacceptable to Alberta and will injure national unity and our prosperity unless it's fundamentally rewritten with the acceptance of the amendments brought forward by the Government of Alberta, the petroleum producers, and the Energy Pipeline Association. So we believe that the bill is now in a minimally acceptable form. If, however, the government or the independent senators and then the House of Commons revert to the original version of the bill, we will challenge it immediately as being an unconstitutional violation of Alberta's exclusive jurisdiction over the regulation of upstream oil and gas.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your summer of repeal underway there in Alberta, undoing a lot of the legislation and policies of the former NDP government. You've wiped out the province's carbon tax, cut corporate taxes, or planning to now with new legislation, introducing legislation to roll back the minimum wage for young people under the age of 17, changing overtime rates, and restoring secret votes for union certification. Tell me what you think the difference is going to be that you believe all of that is going to make to Alberta's economy, and why you're moving so quickly on it.
We were elected just a few weeks ago with the largest Democratic mandate in Alberta history to get Alberta back to work, demonstrating that we're open for business, restoring investor confidence. We've gone through 4 years of economic decline and stagnation. In fact, data out yesterday suggests that we may have been in a technical recession in the first 2 quarters of this year. So dramatic action is required to take the defibrillator to the Alberta economy. That's why we are moving so quickly. The job creation tax cut is a 1/3 reduction in the corporate rate, which will give us eventually the lower taxes than all but 6 U.S. states and lower than all 10 Canadian provinces. That will make Alberta once again a magnet for incoming and job-creating investment. These other changes designed to get people back to work. For example, we've seen a huge increase in youth unemployment and a huge decline in the youth labor force participation rate since the NDP raised the wage cost by 50% in the middle of a recession. We want to get those young people that entry-level job back, especially we're talking here about high school students doing part-time jobs, but that job experience is so important. Really, all of this together is sending a message that people should have confidence once again in starting businesses, in investing in the Alberta economy to create jobs.
There are predictions of another hot western summer and more wildfires. What's your plan to fight climate change in Alberta if it's not through a carbon tax?
Well, we will, in fact, in the fall, be bringing forward legislation to impose a levy on major industrial CO2 emissions, which represent about 60% of the emissions produced in Alberta. It will also be applied more intensively on those companies that have higher than average emissions in their industry. It will be an incentive to reduce the carbon intensity and carbon footprint of heavy industry. It will also support a fund to pay for research and technology that reduces CO2 output with technology that's exportable to the developing world, which is where we see the real problem in massive increases in CO2 emissions. But Peter, we don't believe that punishing people for heating their homes in a cold winter or filling up their gas tank to drive to work is really a responsible environmental policy. Not even the NDP could estimate by how much that would reduce CO2 emissions.
What will you do when Ottawa imposes its carbon tax in your province after you get rid of yours?
Well, we would immediately challenge that imposition through a judicial reference to the Alberta Appeal Court. At the same time, we will be supporting Saskatchewan's appeal on a similar reference to the Supreme Court of Canada as we support our other provincial allies in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Manitoba.
All right, let's finish on this. If I can frame it this way, once you get done with the summer of repeal in Alberta, it sounds like you're prepared to concentrate on the fall of replace, as in replacing Justin Trudeau. You've talked about perhaps campaigning for Conservatives in Ontario and maybe elsewhere. How do you see your role in the upcoming federal election campaign?
Well, first of all, we're focused on getting Alberta back to work right now, Peter, and also standing up for our province against federal policies that threaten our prosperity, like Bills C-48, C-69, and the imposition of a federal carbon tax. If Mr. Trudeau's government decides to double down on those policies, then I will make it very clear to voters here and across Canada that it is a government that will damage jobs and prosperity and national unity. So I made this very clear, Peter, in our recent provincial election, that if the federal government does not reverse course on some of these anti-jobs policies, that I will speak against that government in the lead up to the next election. I hope, however, that the federal government will listen to Canadians and listen to the Senate committees on those two bills, and that we can find common ground. That was my message when I met with Prime Minister Trudeau. I do hope we can find common ground in terms of shared prosperity on these issues.
All right, Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, always good to speak with you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you for your interest, Peter.